This is Grassroots, the environmental news show. Patti and Doug Wood, welcome back. People who are aware that our world is awash in chemicals, that they're present in almost every product we buy, are used to reading labels. After a while, you begin to get to know some of the worst chemicals and you avoid them when you can. But what about things with no ingredient list, like your clothes? Yes, your clothes. It turns out they can be filled with toxic chemicals that can make you sick or worse. The clothes we wear make a statement about us, whether intentional or not. For some people, it's incredibly important that they wear just the right thing. Other people aren't so particular. But either way, everyone has to wear something, and fashion is big business.
Distinguishing your brand in the intensely competitive fashion industry means finding a way to make your colors look more vibrant, make your clothes keep their shape longer, repel water or stains, stretch as you move, or have other attributes that make them desirable for consumers. And that's where the trouble begins. Because many of the attributes manufacturers and consumers want in their clothes can only be obtained through the use of, wait for it, toxic chemicals.
Alden Wicker is an award-winning investigative journalist and author of To Die For, How Toxic Fashion is Making Us Sick and How We Can Fight Back. Patti and I spoke with Alden Wicker recently. Here's our Grassroots interview.
In 2019, I was contacted by a radio show, and they wanted me to comment on a lawsuit from Delta flight attendants against Lands' End, who made their uniforms, alleging that the uniforms were making them really sick. And at the time, I had been writing about fashion sustainability for 10 years, but I hadn't heard anything about this, nothing at all. And so I reached out to a few people, but nobody could tell me anything about it. So I declined to go on the radio show because I don't like to talk about things I don't know about.
Sure.
And 4 years later, I have an entire book exploring this topic because, you know, when I looked into it, they were one of 4 different major airlines that had these problems with their uniforms, and the reactions that they were having were just horrific. So it would start with rashes and breathing problems, and then it would sort of spiral into them losing all of their hair, having really extreme fatigue, racing hearts. Some of them, their breathing problems were so bad that they had to be taken off the airplane and taken to the ER, or they went into anaphylactic shock when they pulled these pieces over their heads, hives, all sorts of things. So if it was happening to them, I wanted to look into whether or not it was happening to normal people.
So did you actually try to identify which chemicals were linked to those specific health outcomes?
I did a little bit of that. So whenever this would happen at one of the airlines, the airline and the uniform maker would go through a process that was really meant to protect them, not the employees. They would hire a commercial lab to test the uniforms and try to figure out which chemicals might be causing these symptoms. But usually they would also pay a toxicology consultancy to interpret the results favorably to them. And so they would always come out with a report that says, there's nothing in there that rises to the level of causing all of the symptoms. And then they would turn to the flight attendants when the flight attendants would say, that's not good enough. There's clearly something wrong, and say, okay, well, why don't you tell us which chemical is in there that is causing all these symptoms? And with tests running into tens of thousands of dollars, that was an impossible task.
This is such a perfect example,
Wow.
Shifting the burden of proof.
Yeah. Sure.
From the manufacturers and the chemical industry, and even the airlines were complicit in this, saying, okay, we've discovered that nothing in the in these new uniforms would cause the symptoms that you're having. So why don't you figure it out? Hello. Wow.
So Alden, I'm curious, do you have a background in toxicology?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. I am a trained journalist, investigative journalist. So I definitely had a crash course over the last couple of years. But what I found out is that there's a handful of people throughout the world who study toxicology or chemical or textile science, specifically at the intersection of, toxicology and chemicals and and fabrics and fashion. It's just not an area of study that is taken seriously and gets grants for study. So we have a lot of holes in the research. I mean, we have an overwhelming amount of evidence to show that this is a problem. For example, there was a Harvard study that showed that the introduction of airline uniforms roughly doubled the number of symptoms such as breathing problems, rashes, all of those different things in flight attendants. So we know that this is a problem. There's so much more evidence. We know that there are chemicals being discovered that have known links to cancer, to sensitivities, to reproductive toxicity. But the holes in the research are being leveraged in order to stave off any accountability or legislation around this.
Is it particular to uniforms, or is this pervasive throughout the whole fashion industry where chemicals undisclosed to the consumer are being thrown into clothes that people are buying completely unaware that the chemicals are there? I mean,
exactly.
who's going to imagine, that you buy a shirt or you buy a pair of pants or whatever it is you're buying, and there's no ingredient list because you don't expect there to be an ingredient list, but there should be, maybe.
There should be, absolutely. If people saw the number of chemicals that were present, even just the deliberately added chemicals, I'm not even talking about the contamination and the accidental, residues left on there. I'm just talking deliberately added. If people saw the number of chemicals present in these products, I think they would be really shocked. It would run to 50 ingredients or more. And we would look at that list and we'd say, hey, I don't want formaldehyde in my products. I don't want PFAS, forever chemicals in my products next to my skin. But right now, all we're told is that it's 100% polyester or 56%, rayon viscose.
And it's in and just to my point, it's not just uniforms.
No, it's not just uniforms. This is a problem for ultra fast fashion brands, especially, but also fast fashion brands, mass market brands, mall brands, even sustainable brands that call themselves sustainable, and luxury brands, all of them, children's brands. There are examples of companies that do absolutely nothing around chemical safety in all of those product categories.
So basically it's across the entire apparel industry.
And accessories and shoes.
And accessories. I mean, across the entire industry they're using. So why are they adding these chemicals? What are the
attributes
of these chemicals that these manufacturers want in their particular, clothing items?
They serve all sorts of functions. Some of them are inherent to producing synthetic fibers. So BPA and phthalates are used as plasticizers in things like PVC. If you're getting a clear shoe, that might be PVC. They are inherent to manufacturing polyester, spandex. So there are some that are just ingredients. There are dyes. There are things like lead and heavy metals that are added to dyes in order to brighten them or affix them. There are finishes that are added for performance. So stain repellency, water repellency, anti-odor, anti-wrinkle, easy care. All of those things are put on to maybe provide performance, but really the purpose is so that you can sell a branded textile product and charge more for it. And then there's accidental contamination, just stuff floating around the factory or the warehouse, pesticides, fungicides, things like that are not purposefully added, but they end up on there because fashion, it's you don't know where your fashion has been. Let's put it that way.
You don't know where your fashion has been. I love that.
Me too.
I just wanted the train of thought right here. So people are saying, well, once I wash it, then I'm washing out all these chemicals. Is that right?
I mean, if you put something with black dye through your washing machine, it doesn't come out white.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the dye stays.
And some of these, the dye stays, some of these finishes, they're meant to last a long time, right? If you're getting something with an anti-wrinkle finish, you don't want it to wash out the first time you wash it, right? You want that to stay. I mean, I'm saying you, the general
consumer.
You.
Yeah.
Not me. So a lot of those things are meant to stay on a long time. And, detergents, fabric softeners, they also are meant to apply fragranced products and substances to your fashion, which clings to it for a very long time. So it will help with some things like if there's accidental contamination of pesticides, if the dye is crocking or like coming off when you wear it, things like that. But it's not going to get rid of everything.
And those chemicals, like you said, those forever chemicals like PFAS, which are stain and water resistant. I mean, they're never going to come out because that's the whole purpose, right? You know, and especially in sportswear, right? And in exercise clothing. Talk a little bit about that piece of the industry. I mean, because I'm thinking that they're probably using antibacterials like triclosan and all kinds of stuff in workout gear. What's the big conversation here about workout gear?
Well, so I haven't found evidence of triclosan being in workout gear still, but they are using things like nanosilver, and researchers have a lot of concerns about what happens when we ingest or absorb nanosilver into our body. It's a very new area of industry, so it's also a very new area of research, but as well as these performance fabrics for going skiing or hiking, or just inclement weather in general. So yeah, they do have a layer of this class of chemicals called PFAS. There's over 12,000 known types of PFAS. And we've known that these are incredibly toxic for 20 years now. The industry would actually like you to believe that those finishes will never come off, but they're always coming off when we wear them. There's research from Dr. Graham Peasley out of Notre Dame that shows that when you get some of these stain-proof children's uniforms, they're being exposed to high amounts of PFAS every day that they wear them. And, you know, we need more research on that, but that's incredibly alarming because PFAS has been linked to several types of cancer, obesity, thyroid disease, suppressed immunity, all sorts of things that we don't want our children being exposed to. And it's coming off on your skin, it's coming off in your house dust, and it's coming off in the wash.
Patty, you better call Maggie back.
Yeah, no.
Our daughter.
Our daughter has a 10-year-old, our grandson, who's like, totally into baseball, and all their uniforms are just like coated. So she's done all this research to get pants. She gets these knicker style pants for him, and she's the only one who's wearing them on the whole team, because they're cotton and they don't have all those things on them. She spends her whole life scrubbing the knees, and I mean, she wants him to slide into home base, right? But, every time she sees him play, she's, oh my God, I'm going to spend the 3 hours, scrubbing out the dirt stain. But whatever, it's really important. And it's important for people to have this information. This sounds like something that should be driven by the public. I mean,
yeah, well, we're going to get there, Patty. So is it reasonable to think that there might be more of these toxic chemicals in something like a Little League uniform than there would be in school clothing that a kid would wear to school? In other words, is there a higher level of concern around uniforms, or can't you say that? Is it across the board?
They have different types of chemistry concerns. So a pair of kids' uniform slacks that are water repellent will have PFAS. In fact, many of them do have PFAS, tests have shown. A synthetic sports uniform, the concern there is that it has skin sensitizing disperse dyes, which are used for polyester. And many kids won't react, but many kids will react. Many kids have sensitive skin. And if they're sweating in them, that's drawing those dyes out onto their skin. In fact, a lot of the research coming out of Duke started because Dr. Heather Stapleton bought a sports t-shirt for her kid, and he started complaining that he was itchy, and she pulled it off, and it had a rash in the pattern of the t-shirt on his back. And luckily, she has access to world-class testing equipment, and it set her and her team off down this 5-year road of studying disperse dyes because they were like, what's going on here? I mean, that's the power of being a mother, right? That you're like, oh, I'm going to study this because this is affecting my family.
This is a word I'm not familiar with. Disperse
dyes. So they're dyes that are specifically used for polyester. If you think about polyester, it's a plastic. Have you ever tried to dye a plastic, you need a special type of dye called disperse dyes in order to get it to stick.
Got it. Your whole book was about dyes, really, wasn't it? I mean, or primarily about the dyes that are used in fashion?
It's in the title, To Die For, but it really ended up being about, some of it was about dyes. I mean, the thing is that the invention of the very first synthetic fossil fuel based dye set off our entire society down a road of chemical industry. A lot of the biggest chemical and pharmaceutical companies today got their start as dye manufacturers. So fabric dye is at the root of our entire global chemical industry today.
Interesting as that.
That's really fascinating. This is so interesting. What have we not covered that we need to cover?
I mean, it's a big book.
Well, you know what? Let's just talk about tris. So tris became, the flame retardant. This became the first time that the public was aware that there were intentionally added chemicals to clothing. And because it was for babies or infants and children, it got a lot of press and they wound up removing tris. And we, are not sure that they haven't replaced it with other flame retardant chemicals, because children's clothing manufacturers that don't use flame retardant say, this is not flame retardant, don't wear Lucid, make sure it fits tightly or something.
Right. And that's also based on a world that we don't live in anymore. I mean, it's sort of similar to flame retardant mattresses and couches. That's based on, 19th century, like everybody having a fireplace and candles all over their house. And you wouldn't want your kid with their highly flammable cotton nightgown to walk past a candle or stand in front of the fireplace and catch on fire. We don't really live in that world anymore. And, we also don't live in a world where people are falling asleep with cigarettes in their mouths, and setting their bed on fire. And that also came up in terms of the airline uniforms, because when they switched from wool, which is naturally flame retardant, to polyester, they had to add chemical flame retardancy. And, again, there's a researcher from Notre Dame quipped in this email that, like, if a plane is going down full of jet fuel, a 10-second candle standard is not going to do anything to save these flight attendants.
That's terrible.
And there's no open flames on a plane. So what are we doing to these flight attendants in the name of a scenario that is not actually existing or practical?
Patti brought up tris, and that was an example of where the public got wind of something that wasn't right, and all of a sudden there was a big hoopla, and we got rid of, or supposedly got rid of tris. Do you see that happening, and how can we make that happen with the current number of chemicals that are in clothing?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I am hoping that this book does help start a movement, because I think people just don't know. They're completely shocked. And the book, it's pretty freaky when you read it, but I'm hoping that it does shift a change. I think one of the first things that I would love to see happen is just an ingredient list, because I think once people see that, they're not going to be able to look away. And also, I think it's just fair to consumers. Some people get tested and realize that they are allergic to certain chemicals that are used to process clothing. And right now they have no way to avoid those chemicals in their everyday life.
So can we talk about the workers too? Talk about, the people in the garment industry who are A, making fabric or textiles, and then B, sewing it, right? Making it into clothing. I mean, those people are handling those things, and sometimes they're ironing, so the steam is coming up, with the chemicals in them. And talk about that part of it. This is an occupational hazard, I would think.
Absolutely. And what, we've known this for a long time. I think a lot of people, they realize that, every time I have a Google alert set up for fashion chemicals, and I just see all these articles come through that are like, and sustainability around fashion because of chemicals. So people know that this is a problem for the workers. We know that fashion garment places and dye houses are poisoning the water of communities. We know that dye house workers in poorly managed dye houses are breathing in these fumes, touching the chemicals, doing all these things. But I went to India because I was like, okay, if this is affecting consumers who wear the product, it must be affecting the garment workers as well. And it was very quick. I found, with the help of a local journalist, I found garment workers immediately. One of them had these cauliflower reactions all over her legs and scars on her arms because she had been working in a synthetic garment factory sewing this product in the heat. And her arms had healed because her doctor had advised her to quit, but her legs hadn't healed. And that's probably because she continued to wear cheap polyester saris in this very like hot climate every day. And so she was just continually subjecting her body to it.
Wow. Do you know how many millions and millions and millions?
Everybody wears clothes.
Walking around, this country alone in synthetic fabrics, which don't breathe. This is just really a crisis. What do you personally wear?
So I wear a lot of natural fibers. I only shop with brands that I trust. I do a lot of secondhand shopping. I personally, and I've been asked this, I don't have chemical sensitivities. I don't have eczema. I think that's just luck. I may not be genetically predisposed to it. I grew up tromping around in the woods and visiting the family farm, but I think this is a lot more common than people realize. All the evidence points to 1 in 5 people having at least one of these things: autoimmune diseases, contact dermatitis, chemical sensitivity. I mean, it's sort of the thing where once you see it, you can't unsee it. When I was researching the book, whenever I would tell people what the book was about, almost always they would say, I can't do scented products. I have a chemical sensitivity, or my sister has terrible eczema, or, my mom has been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, or I can't wear polyester. It makes me itch and break out. So I think this is so incredibly common, but because everybody was being told, there's no evidence, that it was sort of like we're all just gaslighting each other about this. But I think now that this information is out there, I think a lot of people are going to start making that link and saying, oh, right, yeah, that this was a problem and this is what's causing it.
Are there good brands that don't use these chemicals?
So there's kind of 2 different categories to put this in. One is that there are a few like smaller brands that really put chemical safety at the forefront and only make natural clothing without these performance finishes. So if you have really sensitive skin, you can go to my website, ecocult.com, and you can find a lot of those lists, like, underwear, yoga pants, all those different things. And then there's a different category, which is mass market brands that do make synthetic products, but have robust chemical management programs. So if you have sensitive skin and you shop from one of these brands, so I'm talking like H&M, Adidas, Nike, Levi's, if you have very sensitive skin and or like an autoimmune condition or something like that, and you buy from one of these brands and you buy a synthetic thing, you'll still have a reaction most likely. But if you aren't suffering from one of these illnesses and you need a synthetic product in your life because you're a hiker or for whatever reason, you can be confident that these brands are testing their products to make sure they're not contaminated with hazardous chemicals, things like that. But right now, the fashion industry at large is sort of like, a lot of what I talk about is like brand new research, right? So it hasn't trickled into the fashion industry or to your local doctor yet. So what they're saying is safe is a little bit lagging behind what I've discovered in my book.
And I'm wondering if those companies that are more careful about what they include just as happened with milk, where producers of non-GMO milk put on their label non-GMO.
So the equivalent to that in fashion is the Okotex or Blue Sign or GOTS organic label.
Right.
So again, it's completely voluntary, right? There are a lot of fashion brands that don't do anything, but if you're looking for this, those are some labels to look for.
Cool.
Right. Okay, so I have one last thing to this is the last piece of the picture, which is the cradle to grave question.
Yeah.
So what happens to all of these fast fashions when they fall apart because they're so cheaply made, and they're all synthetics, and they all wind up either back in the countries where they were originally made, or it just goes into a place like the Chilean desert.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens in the environment when all of these chemicals get kind of mixed together in a fashion dump?
So there's some interesting research happening right now in Ghana, because Ghana is one of the biggest recipients of our secondhand fashion. So there's this huge fish kill because in Ghana, a lot of the fashion we send them is not wearable. It's trash. And so it gets dumped in open landfills. It gets dumped on the side of the road. It ends up in the waterways. It ends up in the beaches in these like big, twisty, long, huge ropes of clothing. And what they think happened is that there was this dredging of one of the large water channels. And when that happened, it stirred up all of the chemicals, all of these hazardous substances that had been leaching off of the clothing, and it was released into the ocean. And that's what they think led to that fish kill. Similarly, here in the United States, one of the biggest fish kills in Georgia's history happened in the Okeechee River. And they think that was because there was a textile manufacturer who was making high performance, waterproof and fireproof textiles for like uniforms, and not processing its wastewater correctly. There was some things in there that we know about, and then also PFAS, which, by the way, it is not yet illegal to put PFAS in a river in the United States, and they think that that's what caused the fish kill. So this is not just an over there problem.
Alden Wicker, author of the book To Die For, How Toxic Fashion is Making Us Sick and How We Can Fight Back, and developer of the website EcoCult, that's eco-cult.com. To learn more about the show today and the whole panoply of issues we cover here on Grassroots, including many of the chemicals we talked about with Alden Wicker, please visit our website at grassrootsinfo.org or follow us on Facebook at Grassrootsinfo and on Instagram at GrassrootsENews. That's going to do it for this edition of Grassroots. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of the show. Thank you for listening. See you next time.